This time of year, there are a steady stream of packages being delivered to people's porches. For some, the drop-off is a whack of gifts to fulfill the requirements of a secret Santa. For others, it's a major award that turns out to be a gaudy appliance that your wife hates and later breaks, assassinates, smashes, destroys, ruins, and grins about it. And for the lucky ones, yeah, they get things like that placed on their front stoop, but they also get regular deliveries of spark plug coffee. Yes, if you're looking for an ideal gift and you're not into toy firearms, then get a loved one a bag of the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans that anyone is going to find in Canada. Ralphie might even like this stuff. And what you order will be delivered to you Americans and we Canadians within a week. They do offer him wine. Maybe he likes coffee. Those of us who live north of the 49th parallel will get our orders without even having to pony up the cashola for shipping. No ponying, no cashola for the shipping. The menu for Sparkplug has a delectable assortment of blends and roasts. There's no month on the calendar with more holidays than December, so you can shake up your palate and go with something else from what you were sipping back in the hot months when there are only 1 or 2 holidays to enjoy. That's because their blends can rotate with the seasons. Speaking of holidays, happy end of Hanukkah. Oh, and if you're a half-calf or decaf aficionado, feel free to go for that instead of the caffeine-y kind. It feels like every adult in A Christmas Story is a member of a club that can never stop reminding the main kid that if he gets what he wants for Christmas, he's inevitably going to end up suffering serious eye trauma. But you don't have to join that chorus. You can be a member, instead, of Sparkplug's Autopilot Coffee Club. That will result in not the potential loss of vision, but in getting you perks and deals that non-members can only dream of. And you will save money on every order. This isn't a Coffee of the Month club, my fellows and fellettes. This club allows you to customize to get your orders when it's convenient for you. So if you need to pause or even cancel your membership, then you can. They couldn't follow this next bit of advice back in the time when this movie is set, or even when it was made, but you can in late 2023. And that advice is to go to a computer and toss the words sparkplug.coffee/HYES into your browser. You'll save 20% off your very next order by using our code that goes HYES. All right then, lovely listeners, we've given you a wonderful stocking stuffer idea, or something that you will want to put in your own cupboard. But the time has come to start talking about today's motion picture. So composer man, with your special Christmas theme, I ask you to play us in. Action! Have you ever seen A Christmas Story? Ho, 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 movie monkeys, and thanks for being part of our festive audience for the 555th podcast in this ongoing classic movie series known as Have You Ever Seen? And thanks to Andrew for that theme. I don't think we thanked him the first few episodes of December. We were such Scrooges. Ugh. Actually, what it was is we'd recorded them in November, and I forgot we'd have a theme in December. I asked the guy to do that, and then I forgot he was going to do it. There's a plane going by. That's fun. Every Monday and every other Friday, we sneak back into the past and see what we think of a classic film that we find there. This is Ryan Ellis, double dog daring you to listen to me yammer on alone on this occasion. I'm not triple dog daring you. I wouldn't take it that far. My delightful wife Bev will be back on Monday when we talk about another Christmas movie that came out the same year this did, Trading Places. So when I prattle on by myself, I break down the plot in order, throwing in asides and quips along the way, give you quiplash. That's dumb. Tomfoolery abounds in these one-man extravaganzas, and you just might hear quite a few middling impressions of famous people. If that doesn't charm you, well, it's meant to. In the spirit of the season, it's the thought that counts. But before I do any of that, I must ladle out all of this picture's bona fides. So The Obsessive Quest for a BB Gun was released by MGM 40 years ago on November 18th, 1983. It cost them close to $3.5 million to produce. Then it went on to haul in a little over 20 mil. So yes, this modest little picture was quite a financial success. I was 9 when this came out, and I don't think I saw it until I was 29, maybe even older. I don't remember ever hearing about this movie when I was this age. And it might have been on TV, although that wasn't so common back then. As we'll talk about, this movie is known for its TV run. This flick rates well on Rotten Tomatoes. It's at 89% with the critics and 89% with the audiences. The average for those critics is 8.4 out of 10, so that's right in line. 89%, 8.4, very good. And the sample size is pretty good because there are 61 reviews on that site, which is a pretty good amount for a 40-year-old movie. Last year's sequel, A Christmas Story Christmas, where a middle-aged Ralphie tries to make the silly season great for his own kids, is at 79% and 75% from the Rotten Tomatoes critics and audiences respectively. I saw that one when it came out last year, and I mildly enjoyed it. Now, let's face it, I'll probably end up watching it again around the time I post this episode on the 15th, since I had to watch this movie really early in December. Speaking of sequels, I'll touch on the other two Christmas Story sequels later on, but I can tell you now that neither of them has any reviews on the tomatoes. Wait, that's not right, they do, but the tomato graphic is just gray. I guess 2 or 3 reviews, which they both had, I think it was, 3, means no coloration on that piece of fruit, vegetable, whatever. Shooting Your Eye Out was so intriguing to Congress that they felt compelled to induct this motion pickaroo into the National Film Registry in 2012, along with Breakfast at Tiffany's, Dirty Harry, A League of Their Own, and The Matrix. That quirky foursome has previously been, you guessed it, reviewed by us over the years. A Christmas Story wasn't up for any Academy Awards, but the flick was nominated for its adapted screenplay by the American Writers Guild, or Writers Guild of America. The winner was Terms of Endearment, which went on to win Jim Brooks an Oscar too, so there's no shame in having to politely applaud that one. But this screenplay was up for 9 Genie Awards, which is Canada's Oscar, or was. A few years ago, the TV awards up here were merged with the Film Awards in what's now called the Canadian Screen Awards, or CSAs. So corporate and boring. I preferred it when they did call it the Genies and the Geminis, but so be it. I got over my fury pretty fast. I broke things, but then I got over it. This won a couple of Genies for Bob Clark's direction and for the script by Clark, Lee Brown, and Gene Shepard. A Christmas Story was up for the Genie for Best Picture, but it didn't win. And if you live in this country, it's hard to be too mad that the Terry Fox story won instead. That guy is a national treasure. A Christmas Story was nominated for 3 American Film Institute lists: the top 100 laughs, the top 100 quotes with an appropriate one, "You'll shoot your eye out, you'll shoot your eye out." And the film was also up for the 2007 AFI Top 100 list. And I just told you about the Genies, right? So I always thought this movie was really technically Canadian, but I guess in a way it's both. There are other movies that qualify that way. We talked about it when we did the AFI movies: Lawrence of Arabia, Bridge on the River Kwai, and one other one at least, maybe more than one other one, that really in a way seem like they're British, but they're not because they made the AFI's list. So there's the evidence of just how much this little holly jolly flicker show has turned into a beloved classic. Although I'm guessing if you're listening intently to this, then you already like this picture and didn't need Canadian award shows to convince you it's good. Anyway, let's crack open this cold one and see what goes on in A Christmas Story. Gene Shepard's voiceover reminiscing about his childhood neighborhood starts us off, as we see a montage of the area around his house and also beautiful downtown Cleveland during the Christmas season. Well, it's actually supposed to be Indiana, but they shot this movie largely in Cleveland. Hey, there's some black people singing Christmas carols. This movie's more integrated than I would have thought, actually, for set in the 1930s into the 40s. And here's our main man, Ralphie Parker, along with his brother Randy and his buddies Schwartz and Flick. They all stare in quiet awe at the plethora of wonderful toys in the window of Higbee's department store, as long as it's quiet. And then young Ralph, played by Peter Billingsley, of course, sees what will be his obsession for the next 90 minutes, an official Red Ryder carbine-action 200-shot range model air rifle. This kid says that so fast, I don't think even I can keep up with that. When he's on the Santa slide and says that. Red Ryder, incidentally, was a Western comic strip that ran from 1938 to 1965. Ryder himself was a cowboy, which you probably guessed when I called the comic strip a Western. As for the gun, I read somewhere that the compass and the stock and the, sundial, weren't features on the Red Ryder model, but they fit Shepard's story, so Clark jammed them into this one weapon of war. So the plot to get him a gun is on. Ralphie tries to incept the idea into his mother's brain of buying the Red Ryder by putting an ad for it inside her Look magazine. He didn't hire Leonardo DiCaprio, probably should have. Although, as I saw pointed out online, this blonde ninny puts the mag inside a mag on his father's bed. Because yes, this is a movie that has the parents sleeping in separate twin beds. Was that ever real, or just a movie and TV thing? If you sleep this way, you can't have a loving schnauzer between you and your wife who will at some point in the night hug your head and make noise directly in your ear and wake you up. I miss that little dog. Oh, Tilly. Anyway, Ralphie exposes his gun lust by blurting out his craving for one when Mom asks him what he wants for Christmas, after she quickly fires back with, "You'll shoot your eye out." So I guess that's a no. We see Ralph's first of many daydreams. In this one, he's a cliché-spouting cowboy who saves his family from a bunch of black and white striped bad guys who are breaking into the yard. Not into the house, because Ralphie's a great shot. They'll be pushing up daisies. This seems like as good a time as any to nutshell this flick, so nice and early this time. So, A Christmas Story in a nutshell. And you thought Lauren Boebert was a gun nut. She'd expect this kid to take a Christmas card picture with that gun and many others. Many real ones. Meanwhile, the old man comes into the house that evening complaining about his car giving him grief. Dude, I've been there. I guess we all have probably, but I've really been there. And then pops his runner in at least the early sections of this flick is that the furnace is a dud too. Oh man, I've been there too. We had to buy a new furnace for this house not even 6 months after we bought the place. Home ownership. Fun times. In the scenes where Darren McGavin battles with the furnace, he deliberately spoke gibberish when he was supposed to be cursing because he thought he'd veer into actual swearing if he tried to use real words. And on that note, Billingsley is saying nonsense when he's wailing on Scott Farkas later on, although apparently those non-word words were scripted. This is something Chris Columbus supposedly suggested Joe Pesci try when they made the most successful Christmas movie of all time, Home Alone. Curse nonsense so you don't blurt out something that will earn an R rating. And let's not forget, Home Alone came out not only the same year but around the same time as Goodfellas, where the guy swears, 7,000 times. When I was a tyke, I don't recall being wrapped up so tight in my winter coat and snow pants that I couldn't put my arms down or speak clearly through a scarf that encircled my entire head. Maybe it happened, I don't remember it though. But Randy Parker does have to deal with that throughout this film. Of course, this is probably based on reality, but it's also just a chance to laugh at a kid who's wearing enough snow gear to stop a bullet. Or a BB. I had my first really good chuckle of the movie when people walking by accidentally knock Randy over while he's wearing all this stuff. And he's fallen and he can't get up. It's like a turtle. I can't get up. Ralph's school is integrated, and there's actually more than just one token black kid in this class. There are at least two, and we had the carolers earlier on, so for movies set in the 40s, 30s, whatever, and also made in the 80s, I'm a little bit surprised there's this many people that aren't white. It's good, but just a little bit surprised. So it's funny that they had their facts about Indiana in the 40s wrong in a progressive way. Okay, it's time for Ralph's snarky buddy Schwartz to triple dog dare their other friend Flick to put his, they call me Flicka, was that Flipper? Oh. My friend Flipper. So he dares him to put his tongue in a frozen pool. Has anyone ever actually done this? And if they have, did it stay stuck? I want to know, but I don't want to know. Seems like it could have gone bad. I had another legit laugh when Flick's tongue really does get stuck. It probably shouldn't be funny that this poor kid might have to rip his tongue to free himself, but the way this is played is just sadistically funny. I'm laughing thinking about it now. And I've seen this scene, 10 times, maybe more, because I've watched the movie probably 5, 6 times. And I've seen the scene, we all have probably, just in little bits and pieces. Maybe I've seen this 30 times, I don't know. Still funny. The way they did this, without risking Scott Schwartz's tongue in a real icy pool, by the way, was there was a tube inside the prop flagpole that would suction his tongue to it. Pretty simple effect, although I think I noticed the pole move slightly when the kid pulled back to try to get himself loose at one point. Still, it's an iconic scene. Oh, and by the way, I said Scott Schwartz, and that's one of the fun things here. Scott Schwartz plays Flick, and R.D. Robb plays Schwartz. And I got to laugh again when Ralphie runs inside despite Flick's desperate cries for help because the bell rang. He's a slave to the bell. I might get in trouble. I love when the fire department and the coppers show up. The coppers! My first thought was, what do they plan to do? And how did they get there so quickly? He's only been licking that post for a minute or two. Although they do manage to pull him off by just pulling him off. I think I heard somewhere, maybe it was my mom, and maybe it's not even true, that if this ever happened, you'd have to just use warm water, and that would loosen it up, and probably it'd be okay. At least the Flicker is a stand-up guy. He comes back to class with bandages on his tongue, but he won't tell Miss Shields who put him up to it. He's Johnny Tightlips. He ain't saying nothing. And that's partly because he can't speak clearly right now anyway. It was worse. And who's the only kid who's laughing about all this? When the teacher's not looking, of course. But Schwartz, the one who did put him up to it. No remorse for this young Midwestern sociopath. He needs some comeuppance. Uh-oh, it's the laughing ginger, Scott Farkas, who shows up when the three friends and Randy walk home after school. The Scutster corners them in an alley, although it doesn't look like they really are all that cornered. It feels like most of them could have slipped away, even if one of them was caught and had to catch a beating. And yeah, I guess Schwartz does get some comeuppance for the flagpole incident because it's him that Scott puts in an armbar and orders to cry uncle. So yeah, the other three could get away, and I guess they do. And Schwartz cries uncle many times before Lord Farquaad will let him go. Nice button on this scene, too, when Scott's little accomplice, Grover Dill, exchanges congratulatory shoulder checks with Scott until Farkas hauls off and really slugs Grover on the arm, causing some real pain. It's one of those things the kid actually could have been saying, "Oh man, you actually punched me. Geez, Zach Ward, lay off." Pops comes home that night and gleefully lets the family know that he got a telegram telling him that he's won a major award and it'll arrive that night. But I want to know, is the family really always eating meatloaf, potatoes, and cabbage for dinner, not just that evening? That's what I read. If it's true, that could be a comment on how they're so boring that they never get to try other meals. Or it could be that the production shot the kitchen scenes in a day or two and used the same prop food and just changed their clothes. Anyway, little Randy is at that stage where he refuses to eat, but he does play along when Mom's little piggy game gets him to stuff his face into his plate and maybe swallow some of what's on there. He's a good oinker. Melinda Dillon's delight in playing off Ian Petrella is pretty charming here, too. There's no time for dinner anymore, though, because the major award has arrived. What's in the fragile wood box? I love that gag that the old man thinks it's Italian, although Mother points out that it says fragile. Okay, but what's actually in there? My breath? It's baited. I guess back in these days, they used enough straw to feed an entire family of horses, just so it would keep a sexy leg lamp safe inside. And that's what it is, a leg lamp. This thing is tackiness galore. Your dad wants to put it right by the window in the front room. Mama sputters her protest, but this is 80 years ago, man. Nobody cares what she thinks, least of all her husband. Just hit me, the end of the movie when they're sitting on the chair looking out at the snowfall, and even he might have been okay with moving the lamp when they put the tree up and had to have a view of the outside, but it would have blocked their view if that lamp was still sitting there. The old man goes outside to the other side of the street to see what the lamp looks like in the window, which draws a crowd. People who are just so starved for entertainment in this scene and in that hearse scene in The Magnificent Seven. We have enough entertainment options coming at us from every angle in 2023, but watching a guy get his wife to position a stupid-looking lamp in a window was this era's height of, hey, what's going on here? And it should be noted that the director, the co-writer, and the producer, Bob Clark, also acts in this film. He plays Swede, the curious neighbor who's the first one to notice Mr. Parker out in the street. Now, it's Clark who points out in the commentary that this whole thing is very episodic, the whole story. The only real story arc is that Ralph wants a gun. So back to that. Ralphie's second fantasy is when he imagines getting an A++++++++ whatever for his theme about what he wants for Christmas. We'd call it an essay now, but I guess they called them themes back then, at least in Indiana. Miss Shields just hates what every other student wrote, but she's orgasmic at the poetry of our young man's almost erotic desire for a Red Ryder BB gun. As she and the whole class celebrate Ralphie's wordsmithery, I was sitting there with a huge smile on my face. I wasn't laughing aloud, but very much smiling. It's just pretty cute. You don't have to laugh out loud at every moment in a comedy. Triumph in your daydreams turns to nightmares going home because we next get a comically sped-up scene of the bullies chasing the four boys through the alley after school again. Go home another way! But then it wouldn't be funny. The Parkers live on Cleveland Street, by the way, and I mentioned that they shot in Cleveland, but they're supposed to be on Cleveland Street. I believe he says that in the voiceover, Gene Shepard. And they also filmed here in Toronto, and you get proof of that when they go get that tree, and you see Toronto streetcars roaring past in the background. We have pretty distinctive streetcars, and they're also distinctively unreliable. Maybe that's the subway. Well, the whole transit system, which might have been great 80 years ago, leaves a lot to be desired. Ask Bev, she'll tell you. On the way home from picking up their tree, the family's car's front right tire blows out. Daddykins wants his wife to check her watch because he thinks he can change it in 4 minutes flat. Time me. Mom suggests Ralphie go out and help him change the tire. I guess it's a father-son bonding exercise, which is pretty much going to ensure that 4-minute goal will not be met. Stupid kids. The kid's job is to hold the hubcap so the old man can put the nuts or bolts in it. He says nuts. People online point out it's bolts. There is so much pedantry online, and I do respect it. Only an excited dad knocks it out of his hand and everything goes flying. I don't really know why Ralph thinks this is a big enough deal that he says, "Oh, fudge." But it's a classic moment in this movie. I say he had no reason to let a swear rip there because it was Dad's clumsiness that caused everything to end up in the snow, not his. I don't know if I ever had my mouth washed out with soap when I was a kid, which in this case amounts to just having a dry bar sit in Ralph's yapper for a while. So it could be worse, it's not wet. But I think my sister did have this treatment once. I remember the first time my classmates heard me swear. I don't know how old I was, but it was apparently a big deal that goody-goody little Ryan Ellis cursed. And I don't remember when I first swore in front of my parents, accidentally or on purpose. No soap, though. Or was there, and I've blocked it out. It's all coming back to me now, the trauma. No. Anyway, Ralphie gets to enjoy this treatment until he's ready to rat on who taught him that dreaded, beautiful word. A clever moment in Shepard's voiceover is that he says something like, well, obviously I heard it from my father, the guy who swears a blue streak about his furnace all the time. But instead, Ralphie fingers Schwartz. Ever since he convinced Flick to put his tongue to the pole, the schwa's life has gone to pieces. He's the one who got beat up by Scott in the alley, and now he pays for supposedly teaching Ralphie the fudge word. Mrs. Schwartz's over-the-top performance on the phone when Mother Parker calls her is pretty great. What? My voice cracked there. I couldn't find a credit for Mrs. Schwartz. I don't know if she's actually credited. She should be. She's a pretty funny voiceover performance. We hear the kid getting wailed on, even though he has no idea why he's even in trouble. Although, curiously, isn't it Schwartz who was earlier calling Flick a smartass? He did that a couple of times, in fact. That's not as bad as the mother of all curse words, but it's still something he'd probably get punished for saying if his parents ever heard him say even that. Which surely his father says to him all the time. I got that feeling he comes out of the house, his first scene. blah, 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 smartass. I think that's when he's talking about the flagpole thing. This is a movie of nice touches, and there are two in short order about that bar of soap. First, Mother tries tasting it and can't even last 5 seconds before she spits it out. Ralph was a hardened Marine capable of withstanding torture in comparison to his mom, because it looks like he held it in his trap for a good long while. But the second nice touch comes in Ralphie's third fantasy in the movie, where he's a blind kid who shows up on his parents' front porch. How did he go blind? It was soap poisoning. The folks weep. It was pretty funny. The folks weep in shame, and McGavin has a fun line when he says, "I told you not to use life, boy." And Ralphie smiles directly into the camera when they're not looking. Our movie on Monday has a few moments of looking directly into the camera, and this film has maybe 3 cases of it too. No, 2 for sure, and one of them is right here. Randy and Ralphie's favorite radio program, remember this is pre-TV, is Little Orphan Annie. We see them listening to it while watching the radio a few times in the first half of the picture. It's not that I can't imagine crowding around a radio and watching it when there's nothing to actually watch, but I grew up long after this was a thing. I should have asked my dad if he did that when he was a kid. I think maybe he did tell me that one time. My mom's a little younger than him, so maybe she had TV by the time she was old enough to remember what she did for the evening's entertainment. Ralph gets a letter in the mail from the Little Orphan Annie show and his very own secret decoder pin, or ring. Secret decoder ring. I wrote pin, it's ring, isn't it? Anyway, that will allow him to decode a secret message that they read on the show. He just needs some privacy to crack it. Heading for the bathroom. And what's the all-important message? Be sure to drink your Ovaltine. His disgusted reaction to the crummy commercial is great. But hey, it seems like he's learned no lessons about swearing because he says son of a bitch in this scene. At least he's smart enough to only say it to himself, not in front of his folks. If this isn't Melinda Dillon's best scene in the movie, it's her second best, when she accidentally on purpose breaks the lusty leg lamp. She has a sly look on her face as she marches into the living room with a watering can, while Mr. Parker's down in the basement battling the furnace again, so no witnesses. And it's obviously quite deliberate. It's not even that the broken lamp part's all that funny. It's that her husband, A, hears that she did that in the basement when he's making noise and banging on the furnace, but also when he comes up to glue it back together and tries to gently put the shade back on, it collapses the whole thing and re-breaks it. And you see Dillon barely able to keep from laughing in the background. Victory, Mom! Ralphie's world is nearly shattered when he only gets a C+ on his theme. Miss Shields even adds a PS at the bottom of the paper, noting that he'll shoot his eye out. He was far from that A++++ he dreamed about. Virginia, there is no Santa Claus. This kid was robbed. Since things haven't been rosy for our hero lately, Scott picks the wrong day to throw a snowball in his face. Ralphie goes ballistic, tackles the Fark monster, and just pulverizes him, punching him over and over. He even gets a nice shot in on Grover when the bully's apprentice tries to step in. Not enough Grovers in the world. Somehow Ralphie doesn't get tired despite hitting Scott what seems like hundreds of times, also cursing while doing it in a way that would make his dad proud. And just like the old man, he isn't saying words, just gibberish. It should be noted, I think, that this beating can't hurt the bigger kid too much, considering Ralph is wearing mittens. A knuckle sandwich can't be as painful when it's padded, although Scott is crying and has a bloody nose through all this. And we never see him again, so obviously he learned his lesson. Randy does 2 great things in this scene. First, after Ralph knocked Scott down, his glasses flew off, and Randy made sure to pick them up so they wouldn't get stepped on and broken. What a good brother. Second, he goes home and gets Mom to come break up this skirmish. And hey, how about this tie-in? Once they get home, Mom puts a cold cloth on the back of Ralph's neck to calm him down, just like Gary Cooper and Barbara Stanwyck do to themselves to keep from being sexually aroused about each other in Ball of Fire. And that's a movie I covered just 2 weeks ago. I love my links. I also love this scene. Mom really takes care of him. Randy, though, hides under the sink crying that Daddy's gonna kill Ralphie. That was so sweet. I almost teared up a little bit. I thought that was so cute. But anyway, Mom has got her boys back. She never even tells Dad the real truth, just that he got in a fight, and you know how boys are. Roger Ebert points out in his review that the old man seems to know something about what happened, even before he hears this, "Oh, it's nothing," rebuttal. But that's the end of it. Ralph popped his provoker in the puss, and maybe his mother knows that's what needed to happen. We don't want kids solving their problems with violence, no, but when the problem is violence, maybe taking care of it this way is more justified than if the bullying was just about Ralphie's waistline or his sporting talents or a big nose or something. So he's not going to get killed after all. And if you think about it, Daddy's going to kill Ralphie. What happened the last time he got in trouble? His mother handled it with soap, which was pretty terrible, but he wasn't beat up. The local Santa Claus parade happens a lot later in this town than they do in my city because we're very deep in December, and yet here's the parade. I think this might even be Christmas Eve. Maybe I've got that wrong, but I think it might be Christmas Eve. The family hits the department store after they enjoy seeing Wizard of Oz characters interact with Christmas characters. The folks will do some shopping, and the young fellers can go see Santa. Ralphie needs to ask the head man to get him a gun. It's come to that, because Mom isn't going to arm him. Trouble is, the night is quickly ending, and the Parker boys have to wait in a long line. especially after Gene Shepard cameos as an angry older man telling them, "The line starts back there." The kid who turns to Ralph and says, "I like Santa," and keeps staring at Ralphie the way Tom Cruise stares at Matthew McConaughey in a Tropic Thunder way is pretty funny. The weirdo just won't stop grinning and staring. Clark nails this part too, when the starer and Randy can only shriek and cry when they're put on Santa's lap. I've seen plenty of pictures of kids on the laps of mall Santas who are absolutely bawling in fear. You probably have too. I don't think I did that as a kid, but maybe I did. I don't remember. The unflappable specimen speaking to you now was pretty flappable back in the day. Although I seem to remember coming across a picture at my dad's memorial a few weeks ago. We just brought photo albums and it was all the family. It was easier that way. You didn't have to rip the pictures out of the books. So I saw this picture of myself where I was a year or two old and just grinning my goofy little bad haircutted head off while I was perched on St. Nick's knee. Clark also nails that the elves are obstinate and fed up. It is nearly 9 o'clock at night and they've had a long day of dealing with screaming kids, and I'm sure they're not paid very much. The poster shot of the movie happens here when, after Ralphie panics in the moment and can't remember to tell Santa what he wants for Christmas, then he gets pushed down the slide because the line has to keep moving. There's a touch, too. They are put on a slide. Don't just walk away. But then he stops his momentum and climbs back up to say faster than even I can that he wants that blasted gun, and then grins. Poster shot. But even a mall Santa knows, "You'll shoot your eye out, kid." They're all saying this whenever he confides in an adult, that he just wants a weapon for Christmas. I think it's a conspiracy, and they're all in on it. After the snarly Sinterklaas again pushes the gun nut back down the chute, and this time he does go down all the way, the Parker parents show up and ask how it went. Ralph thinks he blew it, but Dad knows it's going to work out because the real Santa knows what Ralphie wants. And the old man knows it too, as we'll find out in a few minutes. Wait, they're putting up their tree on Christmas Eve? They are. Do people ever do it that way in reality, not trimming the tree until the night before? How long did they leave it up afterwards then? Is this an American thing? Because our neighbors had their yard decorations and lights up about 4 weeks ago, so I assume their tree was in place in the living room too. Some people have more than one tree. Yeah, it's been 40 years since this movie was made and about 80 years since the story's set, but I just don't get why they spend time on Christmas Eve getting the tree in place. Isn't that time to have great food and drink? And then, Christmas morning is here. In some ways, Randy reminds me of myself at this age. The only difference is I couldn't sleep as late as he appears to. I was too excited. Ralph wakes up when it's daylight, which would mean it's probably 7:30 in the morning, and he has to wake Randy up. I feel like I'd sometimes wake up at 4 or 5 a.m. and either just lay there and try to remain calm, or get up and try to do something productive. But down they all go to the living room and rip those gifts open. Yes! Don't carefully unwrap and save paper. Christmas presents are meant to be torn open with haste. No matter how old you are. Even if you're 70, rip them open. Randy gets all kinds of stuff and so does Ralph, but there's no gun under that day-old tree. I like when both of them see that they got socks as a gift and then toss them over their shoulder. Dudes, get to be my age and you hunt for good socks. I bought some at Winners a few weeks ago, but I can't find the same brand again. It haunts me. Another one of the most famous scenes in this movie is when the boy's aunt gifts Ralphie a pink bunny costume. Full body. Mom thinks it's great, but Pops claims his oldest looks like a deranged Easter bunny. And believe it or not, people today actually dress in this bunny suit and have contests about which is the best one. These superfans also try to track where all the filming locations in Cleveland and Toronto were done, and I guess take pictures of themselves being there. A guy even bought the house they used as the Parker house and designed it to look just like it does in the movie. A subtle angle I never thought of until I read it a few days ago is that Ralph Arama keeps talking about wanting the Red Ryder BB gun to his mother, to his teacher, to Santa, but he never says anything about it to his father. Although he did put the magazine on his father's bed. That's true. And guess who buys him the gun? His father. The old man plays it coy, getting Ralph to go get that last present that's hidden by the desk in the corner. Darren McGavin's best scene is right here, where he's absolutely giggling as he watches Billingsley carefully pull the gun out of the box. Watching the kid carefully load the BBs into the gun is about as excited as the old man gets about anything involving his kids. It doesn't hold a candle to how jazzed he is about the lamp, but at least he's showing some glee about one of his boys having glee. Being gleeful, being in the state of glee. Okay, kid, you got your gun. You're going to get the gun. Now what are you going to do with it? Well, in one of the greatest payoffs in comedy history, the very first shot he ever takes with his new air rifle does ricochet and come back to hit him right in the face. "Oh no, I shot my eye out," in the voiceover by Shepard. Sometimes even the movies you've seen a half dozen times can make you bust a gut just as hard this many viewings in. I think this even took me by surprise the first time I saw this movie, so I had to have laughed at it then. But here I was in full chortle mode, say that multiple times fast, full chortle mode, on a day where, to be honest with you, I was in a pretty bad mood. I'm a little bit today too, I didn't get a lot of sleep. They could have had him be a great shot and all his dreams come true and none of this happens. Instead, everybody said this would happen, and then it did. So this is one of my favorite payoffs in any movie, especially in a comedy. The little liar quickly thinks of a tall tale and rushes inside. claiming an icicle fell off the roof and hit him in the face, and for some reason, Mother believes him. Well, as much as I love how good a mother Melinda Dillon plays in A Christmas Story, she's a little naive too, in this scene at least. And Ralph gets away with it. Although what were they going to do about it if they knew what really happened? Other than maybe take his gun away from him, I guess. And Second Amendment types would lose their poop about that. Just to give us a climax, I guess, the neighbor's dogs end up in the Parker kitchen, and that pack of maniacs make off with the family turkey that had been sitting on the table. Which is bad enough, but the old man has spent the past few minutes obsessing about how much he wants to eat even the uncooked parts of the turkey. That's how much he was looking forward to gnawing on Bird. Lousy, bumpus dogs. But to pick everyone up out of the depths of no dinner despair, Dad immediately tells everyone to get dressed because they're going out to eat. And they end up at Bo Ling, a Chinese restaurant. It's a great touch that this used to be a bowling alley, but now the W is burned out, so it's just Bo Ling. And it's another nice callback that Dad got a blue bowling ball from Mom for Christmas, and they end up at a place that at one time was a bowling alley. So after some frivolity about the Chinese employees not being able to sing Deck the Halls without making the L sound like R's, and then a whole duck being served with its head on, it is a duck, right? I think it's a duck. Then clearly they had a great meal and a great time. Night comes, and while the parents look like they might be thinking about getting in some good bumping after they enjoy some Christmas snowfall, the R brothers fall asleep with a Zeppelin and a BB gun in their grasp, and we're out. A few notes, though, before I talk about the actors. There are so many entries on the IMDb about how this movie's timeline is messed up. There are objects and other things from 1937 or 1939 or 1941 or 1945. I think one answer could be that the adult Ralphie just doesn't remember things exactly correctly, and I sympathize. I've tried to memorize movie quotes word for word, and I'm amazed how often I get it wrong when I watch an actual clip of a scene on YouTube. Usually pretty close, but not exactly right. Memories are strange. You can be positive that something happened a certain way at a certain time involving certain people, and yet one or two key details are at least a little off. Plus, this is just what happens when you make a movie on not the highest budget when the story is set over 40 years earlier. You're going to get some things wrong, and there are going to be continuity errors. And there are with every movie. So the cast. The kid with the blue eyes and the cherubic face, Peter Billingsley, had been acting for several years before this, so this was not even close to this cowboy's first rodeo. He's been more of a producer and a director in the decades since, but did play Ming Ming in Jon Favreau's glorious Christmas comedy Elf. Pete's actually been in 4 Jingle Belly flicks. This, Elf, 4 Christmases, and of course, A Christmas Story Christmas, just last year. He was also in Iron Man. We covered that, and we covered Elf. Billingsley became friends with Jon Favreau and Vince Vaughn back in, I think, the 80s, when they were all still young. They worked on some TV movie together or something like that. So a lot of his credits involve either or both of those guys, especially Vaughn. PDB even directed Vaughn in Couples Retreat. Considering he's the main character and he's in nearly every scene, he doesn't have that much dialogue. Even though the Petester has a great look for this character, and I do think he's solid in this, and often pretty funny, maybe Bob Clark knew the kid had limitations. Not every child actor is Haley Joel Osment. And of course, Gene Shepard does the voiceover for him throughout the movie, which may have been the way it was going to be constructed even if they had Haley Joel Osment playing Ralphie. So his character talks all the time, it's just that Billingsley doesn't. Melinda Dillon is actually top billed and she's wonderful in this, but they didn't even give her a first name. She's just Mother in the credits. Mother! Darren McGavin is just listed as the old man, although some say his name is supposed to be Frank. I guess considering this is all from young Ralphie's point of view, it makes sense that he either wouldn't know their names when he was at this age, or he wouldn't think to refer to them by their actual names. They're just Mom and Dad to him. Or Mother and the Old Man. As for Dillon's other work, she had been nominated for an Oscar for Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind 6 years earlier. She also did a wonderful job working opposite Newman in Slapshot. She's got a tiny role in the Muppet movie too, many people did, and she's Philip Baker Hall's long-suffering wife in PTA's Magnolia. We've covered Close Encounters, Barry, and we covered the Muppet movie, plus Chris and I reviewed Slapshot on our defunct sports movie podcast, Scoring at the Movies. As for her performance in this, I'd argue it was worthy of another Oscar nomination. The 5 who did get nominated were fine to great, including the winner, Linda Hunt, for The Year of Living Dangerously, but Dillon was at least as good as, well, all of them. I'd say she's just plain great in this, actually, especially the sequence where she breaks the old man's ugly leg lamp, and then the way she handled the whole Scott Farkas affair. There have been some ideal moms portrayed in movies over the years. She's pretty high on that list. Darren McGavin acted for over 60 years. He was Gus Sands in The Natural the very next year, which Chris and I covered several years ago on Scoring at the Movies. A lot of those 60 years as a thespian was spent on TV screens. I guess being the star of Kolchak the Night Stalker for a couple years was his crowning achievement, at least on the small screen. I never saw that show, though, so I'd vote for this as the best thing he ever did. Jack Nicholson liked the script. Jack liked the screenplay. That's a bad Jack. And the studio wanted him to play the old man, but they didn't want to pay him his going rate. I love Jack more than almost any other actor, But can you see anybody else playing this role? McGavin was perfect for it, and Jack might have overshadowed the other actors and the story itself if he was in this. MGM might have felt the need to make him a bigger part of the story, although it's not like the parents get short shrift. It's Ralphie's story, but Mom and Dad are in a lot of scenes, and they both have more dialogue than Billingsley does. Still, McGavin was a home run choice, regardless, so if Jack was in it, probably still be a really great movie, but McGavin makes it that much better. Rounding out the family, Ian Petrella was making his big screen debut as Randy. He played the Rand Man again last year in that sequel, but most of his acting work has come in one-offs on some pretty big TV shows in the 80s, like Different Strokes, Who's the Boss, and Highway to Heaven. R.D. Robb was making his movie debut here. The boy who plays Schwartz worked in TV quite often for the next decade, but his next big screen thing was the Brady Bunch movie in 1995. Robb was also in the sequel last year. The boy who played Flick, Scott Schwartz, ironically, was also in A Christmas Story Christmas last year. Just like Robb, he worked in TV a lot over the years, and he also got to be in The Toy with Richard Pryor and Jackie Gleason the year before this. Still, not all that much stands out on his resume beyond those titles. Zach Ward became a cinema icon by playing Scut Farkas. He's now thought of as one of the great bullies in cinema history, especially for Christmas movies, even though the actor himself seems like a sweetheart whenever you see him in interviews. It's not like he's subtle in this, but Ward is pretty effective, even if he doesn't have yellow eyes. I swear to you, he doesn't have yellow eyes. And if you thought for the longest time that his character's name was Scott, not Scut, well, join the club. Join that airplane club. Mile High Club. I didn't look up if it's Teddy or Tedda. Probably it's Teddy, but Tedde Moore. She plays Miss Shields, and she worked for over 50 years, mostly in one-offs on TV shows and in movies most people haven't heard of. The Toronto native was up for a Genie for her supporting work as Miss Shields, but she didn't win. And that nomination surprised me. Either the supporting work was pretty thin that year, or the voters who made her one of the 5 finalists saw something I didn't. She's fine, but award-worthy? Their director was, of course, Bob Clark. He had already made a slasher flick before Halloween made them such a thing when he directed Black Christmas about 9 years before this. And the year before A Christmas Story, he made an absolute blockbuster, which ended up being a forerunner in the crude comedy genre, Porky's, which reportedly is what got Bob the clout to greenlight this movie. So what a diverse list of flicks for one guy. A brutal kill-em-all set during the holidays, a sex romp that helped in usher that style of film, like it or not, and a wholesome Christmas movie about a kid wanting someone to gift him a weapon. We'll just ignore that he also directed Dolly Parton and Sly Stallone in Rhinestone the year after he made this movie, and then eventually made 2 Baby Geniuses movies. The Clark Bar tended to write and produce the films he directed, including his big 3, Black Christmas, Porky's, and A Christmas Story. Rene Dupont produced this with him, and Clark wasn't above directing sequels like the second Baby Genius opus, so I'm sure he would have come back to direct A Christmas Story Christmas last year if he hadn't died in a car accident back in 2007. I guess what happened is, an idiot was not only drunk, but driving without a license, then went and hit Clark and his son head on. So Clark had just passed retirement age before being taken from the world, but his son sure wasn't old enough to have to face death, so obviously it's tragic, but even more so when it's some probably, 20-year-old or something, maybe 30-year-old? The fool who caused all that carnage only got 6 years in prison because he copped a plea. Let's move on to more pleasant things. It's the holiday season, man. Clark, by the way, made a sequel to this in 1994 called It Runs in the Family. Not the Kirk Douglas and Michael Douglas comedy from the early 2000s, which I remember mostly enjoying. No, this is the Parkers being wacky in a summer movie. Most of the cast was changed. No Peter, no Melinda, no Darren. So what was the point? And it made about $9. Then A Christmas Story 2 went straight to DVD in 2012, and they changed the cast again. And since Clark had been dead for 5 years at that point, they got Brian Levant to direct that one. This is the Flintstones and Jingle All the Way guy. Yeah. And then, of course, they made A Christmas Story Christmas about a year ago, and it went directly to HBO Max. At least this time, the cast from the original movie returned, even though they were 40 years older. Well, McGavin and Dillon weren't involved at all. Darren died in 2006, and Melinda was close to the end of her life. In fact, she died earlier this year, I think it was. She hadn't been in a movie or TV show for over 15 years as it was, so Julie Haggerty ended up playing Mother P instead. Bobby C. wrote A Christmas Story with Lee Brown and Gene Shepard, basing it on Shep's 1966 book, In God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash. As Clark points out in the commentary, it's not really a Christmas story, it's a collection of stories taken from Gene Shepard's writings. I listened to the first minute of the commentary after I watched the movie while I was tidying up and whatnot, and I learned it is indeed pronounced Gene, not Jean. And then I heard him say that bit about how the script pulls from a lot of sources. What other great tidbits might I have learned if I didn't have other things to do that night? Maybe so many more. As for Lee Brown, she only had a few other writing credits. She acted more than she wrote. She was Shepard's wife for over 22 years. And as for Gene, he has several credits in the IMDb, but most of them are tied to this property. And if you're going to be known for only one thing, you might as well make it an iconic thing. And guess where he got the last name Parker from? Not that Parker is remarkably original or anything, but it's his middle name, Gene Parker Shepard Jr. Reginald Morris was the movie cinematographer and Stan Cole was the cutter. They worked with Clark all the time. Paul Zaza, and Carl Zittrer, Zittrer, composed the music, and they also tended to work with the Clarkster whenever he made a movie. And I think the look, the cutting, and music are rock solid, maybe even close to great, especially considering the budget. This production definitely has a beautiful, authentic feel for the late 30s, early 40s. To put a bow on this review, I wasn't always a huge fan of A Christmas Story the way I am now. An old friend of mine was, and part of the reason why I started watching it was because he liked it so much. I liked it from the beginning, but I didn't think of it as a perennial favorite this time of year the way I've come to like it so much more now. You can probably tell if you listen to this channel regularly that I veer between being a sap for nostalgia and being a cold-hearted cynic. So a movie like this could have easily made me want to retch, just like It's a Wonderful Life could have. Instead, I've grown to like both this and Wonderful Life more the more often I've seen them. Maybe not literally more every time, but anyway, it hasn't waned for me. And that tracks with the fact that TNT and TBS have at different times run A Christmas Story on non-stop 24-hour loops from Christmas Eve until Christmas Day. They did that for years. Just like Wonderful Life got to be so popular after failing at the box office in 1946, and then it ran on free TV so often, that's what made it so popular, and that's why people found it. That's how they discovered it. I don't remember seeing either movie on TV, but I can grasp how these could have embedded themselves in people's brains when TV stations played them so often. People might have liked either one of them at first, but then the spirit of it grew on them as they accidentally, or on purpose, came across it on TV and let it play while they wrapped presents or baked cookies. Not that this movie isn't worthy of its fandom. It's so much fun. For it to make me laugh out loud several times when I was in a pretty rotten mood and was tired from not getting enough sleep says a lot about how good this really is. The actors are authentic and often outstanding. Clark maintains the whimsical tone, and even though it's episodic, the story has a real through line. Kid wants only one thing for Christmas, and then he gets it. I might not watch this flick again in 2024, but I will see it again someday. So that's a big thumbs up for me. And that was how I saw A Christmas Story. In 2 weeks, it will be December 29th, and while I might have mentioned in a previous podcast that I would be taking that week off, I'm going to put up one more solo show before the calendar turns to 2024. TCM recently aired The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer, and we've never covered Shirley Temple before, so her time has come. This isn't her at her peak of stardom when she was 6 years old, but still, she's in it, and that counts. Cary Grant's in it too, so is Myrna Loy. Well, this might be a shorter show, by the way, than most of my Friday solos have been. It is the holiday season, so I'm going to break down the plot beat by beat. I might just get through it fairly quickly. But we're going to end the year with a comedy, and who couldn't use a larf? In 3 days, though, Bev and I will be staying in the year 1983, and we'll be getting that much closer to Christmas. So let's talk about a beloved comedy that's set at Christmas and something that finally gets us in the John Landis game. We've never covered one of his flicks before, so Trading Places will be the rib tickler in question on December 18th. Eddie Murphy! We haven't talked about him nearly enough over the years. I think it's just been Shrek and Beverly Hills Cop so far, and I also think we did them both in 2021. So we're going on 11 years of doing this show, and one of the screen's greatest funny men has only been discussed in 10% of those years before next week. We're fixing that a little bit. I bet you'd like to tell me a thing or two about your own movie thoughts about this or some other motion picture. Well, you can email me, or us, haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com, or you can thumb out some tweetixes. I'm at MovieFiend51, and Bev is at Bev Ellis Ellis. Like most content providers are these days, we're on YouTube. Our page is at HYES Ellis. Fire that into your browser or look for Have You Ever Seen in the search bar on the tube. Maybe you're there right now. We post our shows in full there. We used to do on-camera segments, but we didn't keep up with that. I intended to get back to it during the summer, but obviously didn't follow through. Maybe when we get a little more time in the early part of the year, we'll get back to it again. No promises. Between YouTube and the podcast app, don't forget to review our shows and rate us, comment, like, share. Kindly do all those nice things for a classic movies podcast you love, or that you tolerate. And you can do way better than just be tolerant of Sparkplug Coffee. Our longtime sponsor offers our listeners a 20% discount. Use our HYES promo code to keep some dollars in your bank account. Sparkplug.coffee/HYES is where you need to go. Okay, thanks again for allowing me to ramble on about A Christmas Story. See you on Monday when Bev and I trade places with Eddie and Aykroyd. Meantime, I'm going to seek out someone who's wronged me and wail on him with all kinds of nonsensical swears flying out of my mouth. And if I did that for real, it would be my first ever fight. And cut.